Gotta get my drink real quick. Oh my god. Oh shit, this has English breakfast tea. Pretty good. Hi everyone, my name is Tina, and if you're new to this channel, then welcome. I make content about lifestyle, tech, finance, all that sorts. Editing Tina here. I actually realized that I didn't exactly say what I do or anything like that, so I just want to quickly pop in here and just say that I am a software engineer at a FAANG company, and I make other videos that are about what a day in a life at a FAANG company or a week in a life. So be sure to check those videos out on my channel below. Let's go into why you should maybe not become a software engineer. So of course I want to first preface this by saying just because some of these points you really resonated with doesn't mean that you definitely shouldn't become a software engineer. You know, I don't believe in completely crossing out something from your path, from your career path. So always keep an open mind, but this is just for you to be more aware when you are maybe looking into a role in the tech industry. I want to make this a little bit more positive because I am a software engineer, and maybe some people are thinking about, despite all these cons, why I still became a software engineer. So I want to kind of go over what I did personally to kind of get over these different cons, and maybe some of these cons weren't that bad for me in the first place, like they weren't a deal breaker. So the first reason why you should not become a software engineer is because, I'm just looking at my notes here by the way, because becoming a software engineer is notorious for having those really difficult technical interviews. I remember being in college and I was studying for technical interviews just for an internship. My friends and I would study like in groups for hours and hours and hours for 2 to 3 weeks before the actual interview was scheduled. It can be really scary. I think we kind of overdid it there, and some people may need to study more, whether depending on whether you actually took those relevant classes like algorithms and data structures recently. So obviously the range of how long you have to study and how much you have to study is really different amongst different people. The interviews are pretty brutal. I know that for different FAANG companies, when you're doing full-time interview, you usually have to do 4 interviews. Most of the time that they're back-to-back. I think what Google does is they do 2 interviews back-to-back and then lunch break, and then they do 2 interviews back-to-back after lunch. So those interviews are 45-minute each. All of them require you to know how to code, know the data structures, algorithms. So it can be quite scary. That's obviously something that a lot of people are overwhelmed by. However, this should not be the reason. If this is the only reason that you're not becoming a software engineer, I think that should not be the case. My recommendation for kind of overcoming this fear of going into these interviews is just practicing. And I know that maybe you're like, oh, the reason I don't want to become a software engineer is because I don't want to practice for these interviews. And that's totally valid. But if this is the only reason you're not becoming a software engineer and you want to grow the discipline to study these interviews, have mock interview sessions, maybe gather up a accountability group. Maybe if like other friends want to also become a software engineer, you're all CS majors. I remember when I was studying for my interviews, I relied heavily on LeetCode. I did all the medium, easy problems. I know LeetCode has company-specific problems, but I do think that it's like a premium, like you do have to pay for it, but if it's gonna help you in the long run, I think it's totally worth it. Other than that, other practicing methods, if you have any friends that are in the industry or have gone through these interviews before, even if they're just interns, please just reach out to them, ask them if you can do a mock interview session with them. So if they could just do a 45-minute practice interview with you, and then you'll treat them to coffee or a meal or something like that, I think would be great. Other than a peer practice interview, I think it's also great to reach out to industry members. So people are so accessible these days, especially if you're a student. People are always willing to help students. Even if you're not a student, I think people are always willing to give a helping hand. So if you can, just like look for people in your connection on LinkedIn or Facebook and just see if anyone can be able to do a mock interview for 45 minutes. There's also a website called interviewing.io where you can do these, but you do have to pay. I would say the best method is that latter method of getting those mock interviews set up, because you have to feel like you're actually practicing in an interview setting. When you're just working on a problem on LeetCode by yourself, it's not as similar to the real setting, and you want to make sure that you practice in that time crunch, anxiety producing, situation. The second reason why you should not become a software engineer is because maybe values don't line up. Some of the companies that you've been looking at don't align with your values, or ethically you don't feel like they're right. Especially after the Netflix released the documentary Social Dilemma, there has been a lot of conversations around social media companies. Is it ethical for these companies to make these apps that are so addicting? For example, you don't feel comfortable that some of these companies may be selling user data, and you don't feel like that's moral. In your own research, you read the news about how these companies may not be doing what's best for their users. You feel a little bit conflicted about that. I totally think that's a valid reason. Even so, it's really hard when you're working in a corporate world to kind of get away from that setting. It's not just specific to tech either. It's all across the board. It's like in finance. I personally have struggled and thought about this a lot from myself when I was trying to choose companies. I kind of had the idea of, even though maybe this company or these companies that I'm interning for may not perfectly align with my values, but they're also making the initiative to put users first. Obviously, every company has its flaws. What you also do outside of your company matters a lot. So, for example, even if you're going maybe with a company or applying for a company, interviewing for a company, at a company that you don't perfectly morally align with, you can still do things outside of that company, whether it's donating like 30%, 20% of your income, or even volunteering outside in your local communities. There are a lot of ways to kind of give back and pay it forward into the world. I know, of course, it's not going to completely offset everything that you'd contribute to, everything you do. It's still a step in the right direction. Do your research on this and kind of think of 5 to 7 different ways that you can contribute back into the world, your community, while you're working at this company. Maybe that company offers different programs for their local communities that you can partake in. Number 3 is, of course, this is the thing that's like, it describes a stereotypical computer programmer, is that they're isolated. They don't really get to talk to people. This is kind of a misconception, because even as a software engineer, if you go to a well-balanced company, you'll definitely be interacting, talking to people. I mean, I, on the daily, talk to my product manager, my UX designer, most of the people on my project in my team. I talk to them every single day. So I think that this is totally false that you have to be isolated. And in fact, if you were super isolated and you didn't talk to your teammates in a while, I feel like they would be concerned about you. So at the same time, I understand where people are coming from, because when you're coding, essentially that is alone time. So if I'm coding 60% of the time, then 60% of the time at work I'm alone and I'm isolated, I'm doing my own things. I think if you rather be in a role where you really want to be client facing, maybe being a software engineer would not be the best. But at the same time, I know different companies like Palantir and different consulting companies have these roles where you can be a software engineer and a consultant. So you will still get those client-facing opportunities, but also get to code on the side. So maybe your average day wouldn't look like 60% coding, but more like 30, 40% coding, and then the rest are meeting clients and talking to people. So definitely do your research on different companies. If you feel really isolated and you feel like you're not getting enough of that social fix within your team or within your company, then I think that you should be the one to initialize a social event. Most companies have a dedicated pool of funding just for social events for their company or their specific team or different teams or orgs. So definitely reach out to the person who is the head of the org, the head of the team, and just see if you can schedule a fun event. That's something that I did for my team personally. I really wanted to do like a boba workshop. I was really new to this team, so I wanted to do an event where I could meet everyone and have just like a fun social gathering. So I asked the head of my team if we could do a boba workshop. I organized that entire thing, paid the invoice, got the date, everything. And it was honestly such a fun process, and it was very rewarding to see people extremely happy on my team to do those kinds of events. I definitely want to do more things like that in the future. The other thing is, if you feel like your team is not the best with social events, obviously the first point still applies. But the second point is, there are probably events outside of your team that you could go to, whether it's mentorship event, networking event, or a different speaker series. Attend those events. Have those scheduled on your calendar and kind of make those a priority. Maybe attend like at least once a week. And I think that this is just great to do, since you can get to know your company, your peers, your coworkers. So this is just a really good thing to do, whether you feel isolated or not. The fourth point is that maybe you didn't study computer science or didn't do a boot camp, so you feel like it's quote unquote too late for you to get into software engineering. And this kind of relates to my first point, where it's a high barrier of entry. So obviously the interviews are hard, and especially if you didn't take those classes or go to a boot camp, then it's going to be not a longer process, because if you think about it, college is 4 years, and I had to study 4 years to get a job at my full-time job currently. So you're really just putting all the things that I learned in those 4 years into like maybe a span a couple months. So even if it's going to take a couple months, don't feel bad about it, because that's just something that like we all had to do, whether we went to a boot camp or we studied CS. That's something that we all have to do to pass those technical interviews. And by the way, not all companies do technical interviews. So if you feel like you just need to get your foot in the door, maybe find those companies that don't do super technical interviews. Some of them do more like design interviews or just behavioral interviews. So definitely keep an eye out for those. I definitely know people that have not gotten a CS degree but still got a job in tech as a software engineer. So it's definitely possible. But obviously this is more about being more disciplined yourself to study for those interviews and understand those algorithms, because you're not going to have that structured schedule, college schedule of like, oh, you need to now learn a tree or like a map or something like that. So you need to make sure that you carve out those times to study for those interviews. Number 5, why you should not become a software engineer, is the grueling debugging process. This is obviously very personal. Maybe some software engineers really like the debugging process, and maybe you really like the debugging process. It's really hard for me personally. That's definitely my weak point. It's not just those technical interviews, but your job is very technical. So you're going to have to know how to fix your bugs. When you create a feature or when you roll out a feature, then you're going to have to know how to fix those bugs that users have. And you have to have a pretty quick turnaround. So it can be pretty grueling, especially when it's something that you really don't understand. But at the same time, there's always going to be people, like whether it's your tech lead or someone even above that, that's going to be, or your peer even, that is always willing to help you get through that debugging process. Because I think that once you work for a company, it's very much of a us mindset. At least that's what I hope most companies are. It's a win for everyone if we fix this bug or we roll out this feature. Don't feel super overwhelmed that you won't be as good because you're not as good as testing or debugging. That's all really part of the learning process, and like soon enough, like you will get used to it. And there are always obviously people to help you divide up the workload, so don't worry too much about that. If you just have a good attitude, I think this really isn't that bad of a negative. Final point of why you should not be a software engineer is, and maybe this is a pro for you, I don't know. This is definitely something that I really like, but new technologies pop up I feel like everywhere as a software engineer. The cool and the maybe not so cool thing is that you kind of have to relearn a lot of different, or not you have to, but there are a lot of languages and technologies that come out that you may have to for your company or you want to learn. So you kind of have to keep up to date. When they released React.js, that was a completely new language and people were just learning the basics of it. And now a lot of the applications use React.js. All those technologies that come out, you really have to keep up to date with if your company wants you to, and that may be annoying for some people. Personally, I really like it because I really like to learn, and I think after college, it's a little bit harder for you to learn new things, as sad as it sounds. Think more academically. So it's really great to sometimes just kind of get your hands dirty and learn about this new technology that just came out, or this new language that people have been using more often these days. But I totally get it that it can be pretty overwhelming that you have to kind of understand. But luckily, it's not like they interview you every year and like you have to get a certification every year about because of these new technologies. It's not like that. So it's less of a stress factor in my opinion. All right, everyone, that about wraps up my 6 points of why you should not become a software engineer. Again, I hope that these points didn't detract you from setting your goals to become a software engineer if you are thinking about it. I just wanted to make a video that's more about these are maybe the things that you should be aware of. I think there are always workaround these situations. There are always pros and cons to every single career, every single path. I would say that if you can be disciplined to overcome these obstacles, this is a really wonderful career path, and there are a lot of great companies that would love to have you as a software engineer. So I hope that this was helpful for everyone. If you liked it, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe. See you guys.